الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. Welcome to today's lesson. Sorry about last week. Um, could you just put up your hands if you were able to watch the lesson last week? The one I sent on recording. Okay, if you haven't watched the lesson, then please watch the lesson because I'm going to move on and not recover that topic, but we're going to move on to the next topic. And so we've covered the beginning of the of Kitab al-Janaiz, and we covered the washing of the dead body. We covered shrouding of the dead body, and and within the shrouding there was about the burial and who has most right to do the washing and the shrouding and the burial, and who has the most right to pray or lead the prayer, the funeral prayer. Today we're going to deal with the funeral prayer itself. So we'll start that inshallah. So we move on to the prayer itself. So Ibn Qudama rahimahullah says وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَيْهِ and pray upon him. يُكَبِّرُ ثُمَّ يَقْرَأُ الْفَاتِحَةِ. So the prayer consists of, the first thing he says, you start the prayer like we normally start any prayer with Allahu Akbar, with Takbiratul Ihram, to begin the prayer. So Allahu Akbar. Thumma, he said, then he says, Thumma yaqra'u al-Fatiha. Then he reads Surah Al-Fatiha. And he goes straight into after saying the Takbiratul Ihram, starting the prayer, saying Allahu Akbar, he moves straight and says, then he reads Surah Al-Fatiha. And he says this because he's summarizing the prayer. He's summarizing it up for us and saying it in a concise manner. So what he means by reading Surah Al-Fatiha is reading the isti'adha and the basmala. The isti'adha meaning A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, and the basmala meaning Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and then Al-Fatiha. What is not read is the dua, the opening dua. Opening dua. The scholars here, Ibn Qudama, the Hanbali position is that it's not read. That's what it would seem from his description of the prayer. So the dua al-istiftah, the opening dua, which we read in the prayer, and we only read that in the first rak'ah when we start the prayer, and it's not read in every rak'ah, because this is a question that people raise often. Is the dua, the opening dua, read in every rak'ah or just in the first rak'ah? And the dua istiftah is for the opening of the prayer. So it's read in a prayer other than the funeral prayer at the beginning after starting the prayer saying Allahu Akbar. As for the funeral prayer, then dua al-istiftah, according to what Hanabila seem to say, is that it's not read. But you go straight from A'udhu Billah, you start with A'udhu Billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and then read Surah Al-Fatiha. And the fuqaha differ whether it's acceptable to read the opening dua or not, or it's not legislated to read the the opening dua. The majority of the ulama say it's not acceptable, that it should not be done. But rather one should move straight to Surah Al-Fatiha. And there is no opening dua in the funeral prayer. And that's the view of the majority of the scholars, the fuqaha. Then he says, ثم يقرأ الفاتحة. Then you should read Surah Al-Fatiha. Or then he reads Surah Al-Fatiha. Now, this is a matter of contention between, or a matter of difference of opinion amongst the scholars. The Hanbali position and the Shafi'i position is that the reading of Surah Al-Fatiha is an obligation, is wajib. Just like it's wajib in every other prayer, it is wajib in the funeral prayer. And they have many proofs, but one of their proofs is that the Prophet ﷺ said that any prayer without Fatiha is like a mirage. It's not a valid prayer, basically. That's what the Prophet ﷺ is saying. In the meaning of that is that it's not a valid prayer. And so they say, and because the funeral prayer is a prayer, then it should take the same ruling as all the other prayers. And that is that Surah Al-Fatiha is an obligation to be read, is a pillar to be read, must be read. So it's obligatory to read Surah Al-Fatiha, according to the Hanbalis and the Shafi'i. As for the Malikis and the Hanafis, they believe that it's not legislated for Surah Al-Fatiha to be read. It's not recommended, it's not encouraged, it shouldn't be read. It shouldn't be read because that is for a prayer, and that is not for Salat al-Janaiz, which is a dua. So their argument is that Salat al-Janaiz, the funeral prayer, even though it's called a prayer, it's actually a dua. And the purpose of it is to make dua for the deceased person. And so the only things that are read in it are du'as. And Al-Fatiha is not in that strict sense a dua. So they say it's not legislated to be read. And they have other proofs, like from the companions, when they mentioned how they prayed janazah prayer, or how they prayed the janazah prayer, and it's not mentioned that they read Al-Fatiha. So they have more than one proof. That's the two major opinions. And then we have a third opinion, which is that it is a sunnah. So it's recommended to read it. But it's not obligatory. And that is an opinion within the Hanbali madhab. It's an opinion, it's an opinion of Imam Ahmad. And this is the opinion that Ibn Taymiyyah adopted and said that this seems to be the most correct. Again, this is according to Ibn Taymiyyah. But the madhab is that it's an obligation. And the purpose of Umdatul Fiqh is for our personal practice. The purpose of Umdatul Fiqh and our study of Umdatul Fiqh is for our personal practice, and therefore if we are using Umdatul Fiqh for our personal practice, then we need to follow that which is stated in Umdatul Fiqh and is the madhab of the Hanabila. And that is that it is an obligation and it is a pillar of the prayer, just like every other prayer. So is that point clear? Is that point clear? Hands up if that's clear. Okay, alhamdulillah. So how many opinions were there on this issue, on the issue of reading Surah Al-Fatiha? Just 3, good. And what were the opinions? What did the Hanafis and Malikis say? To make it slightly harder or easier, I'm not sure. What did the Hanafis and Malikis say? Hanafi, Maliki, not recommended. bit more than that. It's a bit more than not recommended. Not acceptable, not mashru, not legislated. It has not been ordered to us in any way. So it's not from the prayer. So it's not just that it's not recommended, it's not to be done. What did the Hanabila and the Shafi'iyya say? It is wajib. It is wajib or it's a pillar. It's a must to read according to the Hanbalis and Shafi'i, Maliki and Hanafi say you can't read, and the third is it is a sunnah to read Surah Al-Fatiha. Okay, whose opinion was it, or who adopted the opinion that it is a sunnah? And where did he get it from? Okay. Yes, it is the opinion adopted by Ibn Taymiyyah, but it's a riwayah, it's an opinion of Imam Ahmad. And so it's within the Hanbali madhab. But it's not the madhab. The madhab is what we have stated, that it's an obligation or it's a pillar. It's obligatory or it's a pillar. Just like in every other prayer, the Surah Al-Fatiha, reading Surah Al-Fatiha is a pillar of the prayer. Meaning if one misses or leaves reading Surah Al-Fatiha, okay, before I give you what's the difference, according to the Hanabila, between a pillar and a wajib in the prayer? Anyone? Yes, Abdullah. No? Yes, somebody said pillar is something that if not done, then makes prayer invalid. Good. And what about the wajib then? You are accountable if you miss a pillar or must do again action. Okay. And what about wajib then? So pillar, it validates the prayer and it must be made up. It must be made up, and there's no way of making up for it. So you have to come with that particular pillar. As for a wajib, then what's the wajib then in the prayer? So if you miss a wajib, what happens? Okay. What is recommended to do? No, wajib is not what's recommended to do. That would be a sunnah. Wajib is, okay, no one's answered apart from Abdullah. Wajib is that if you miss it, then you must make sajda to sahw. You must make a prostration of forgetfulness. Yes, you can't leave it out intentionally, but you can miss it out of forgetfulness. And if you do that, then you must do sajda to sahw, must do the prostration of forgetfulness, whereas the pillar, you can't make it up by the sajda to sahw. Good, alhamdulillah. Okay, so that was the issue of the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. So the Hanbali opinion which we are holding is that it is a pillar or wajib, and they say that the reason for that, one of their proofs that they use is they have a statement of Mujahid radiyallahu anhu or rahimahullah. Mujahid is from the Tabi'een. He's a student of Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, He studied the tafsir of the Quran with Ibn Abbas. He read the whole Quran to Ibn Abbas 3 times, and stopping at every verse and asking Ibn Abbas concerning each verse. So he took directly the knowledge of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma directly from Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma. And Mujahid, much of the tafsir comes through Mujahid, tafsir of the Quran. We move to an issue of tafsir. I want to ask a question about tafsir, just to see if you know, or if you how come this is something that people ask, how come the prophets, there is no full tafsir of the whole Quran from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Full tafsir meaning tafsir of every verse of the Quran from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anyone? Anyone can guess? No one? Maybe? Have someone? Interesting question, yes. People asked me this question many times, and I had to go back and search and find out. It's possible. Is it, Munir says, is it because our Prophet ﷺ asked the companions to prioritize writing of the Quran? That's not the answer I have, but it's the priority more so was to memorize the Quran, and the writing down of the Quran was for specific companions who were scribes. Because not all of the companions could read and write. Abdullah says, perhaps it's due to the fact to leave room for differences of opinion. Difference of opinions, perhaps to an extent. But if you think, when the Quran was being revealed, who was it being revealed to? It was being revealed to the Quraysh. Yes, in the first instance, it was being revealed to the Quraysh, and in the Quraysh's language. Yes, it was revealed in plain, clear Arabic, and the Quraysh at that time were at the pinnacle of usage and knowledge of their language. So when the Quran came to them, they understood it. They understood it perfectly. They understood everything Allah Ta'ala was saying to them. And there was nothing difficult in the wording. Anything difficult, then you find a narration, any word that was difficult, you'll find a narration where a companion will ask the Prophet ﷺ the meaning of this word, or the meaning of this, or the meaning of that ayah. Or they'd have an understanding and they'll check it with the Prophet ﷺ. Because it was in plain, clear Arabic, there was no need for the Prophet ﷺ to explain it to them, because they understood it when they heard it. They understood it when they heard it. They understood it perfectly when they heard it. And they understood what it meant and what it was ordering them and commanding them to do, and what they couldn't bring themselves to do. Because they couldn't bring themselves to leave the religion of their forefathers and say that their ancestors were all astray. They couldn't bring themselves to do that. And they were so connected to their idols that they couldn't leave their worship. But they understood the Quran in the language it was revealed perfectly, so there was no need for the Prophet ﷺ to explain it to them. But only difficult verses, or verses that or words that they didn't understand, they would ask. The companions would ask the Prophet ﷺ, and then that was narrated to us. And that's the main reason why the Quran was not, there's no tafsir of every verse from the Prophet ﷺ. As for the later generations, even Arabs, because they became further from the language and they lost that eloquence that the Quraysh had, they had need for tafsirs. That's why tafsirs were written, to bring, to tell the later generation what these verses meant and what they implied and what they commanded, what they prohibited, and what they were talking about. That's why the tafsirs were written. And we see the tafsirs were written later, much later, maybe 100, 200, I think about 200 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. Because there was no need at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the time of the companions. They knew it. They understood it. The language was still pure. As the language of the Arabs became diluted and became full of slang and mixed with other languages, and the Arabs lost that pureness that they had, there was a need for explanation of the verses, because they couldn't understand it just by hearing it anymore. They couldn't understand it. Even now, we're talking about now, there are parts of the Quran, ayat of the parts of the ayat that every Arab can understand. And then there's parts of the Quran, maybe even the majority of the Quran, that even the Arabs of today don't understand, because the usage, the syntax, the syntax, the words, everything are no longer used by them in their daily speech. And the children, like children whose mother tongue is Arabic, they will only know those words that they hear used in their daily life. And they won't know the words that are in the Quran. They may not know the words in the Quran because they're not used in daily speech. It wasn't assigned to anyone, but some scholars, they specialized in this field, a field of tafsir. And so they wrote books of tafsir. Who can give me examples of books of tafsir? On scholars who wrote in, specialized in tafsir. We're running out of time, so let me help you out. We have Ibn Kathir, he wrote a book of tafsir. We have al-Tabari, who's probably the oldest complete tafsir of the Quran. We have Qurtubi, another tafsir of the Quran. We have later generations, we have more. We have al-Baghawi, who was in the third century after Hijrah. We have we have Ibn Ashur. I mentioned Qurtubi. Maybe the earliest is al-Tabari, and everybody refers back to al-Tabari and takes their tafsir from al-Tabari. As-Sa'di is modern day. We have many tafsir, but the oldest perhaps that I know of as a complete tafsir is Tabari's tafsir. And Ibn Kathir combines between Tabari and Qurtubi. And when you're looking at the tafsir of ayat, and if you were to look at what Ibn Kathir says and then compare it to what Qurtubi or Tabari says, it's as if he's taking directly from them, or taking directly from them, or summarizing them and giving them. Sometimes he disagrees with the tafsir of Tabari or the tafsir of Qurtubi and gives his opinion, or he might change something that Qurtubi or Tabari says, but generally is taken from them. And Allah knows best. That's not our topic. It's just interesting as we talked about Mujahid. So then we mentioned the first takbir, takbiratul ihram for the funeral prayer, and then the reading of Surah Al-Fatiha, and then he says Allahu Akbar again, makes the next takbir, the second takbir, and okay, another point is Surah Al-Fatiha, before we move on to the second takbir. Surah Al-Fatiha, should it be read loudly or should it be read quietly? We have a narration from Ibn Abbas in which he read it loudly. He read it so it could be heard. So he read it out aloud in a janazah prayer, so the ones behind him could hear. And then when he was asked why you did that, he said, لِتَعْلَمُوا أَنَّهَا سُنَّةٌ أَوْ مِنْ تَمَامِ السُنَّةِ. Okay, so he said that for you to learn that it is the sunnah or from the completeness of the sunnah. Okay, does that mean that we should read it loudly? No, the opinion of all of the fuqaha, basically. I can't think of anyone who went against this, especially the four imams, is that it is read silently. It is read silently. There are some people in our modern day who take this narration of Ibn Abbas and implement it and say that this is the sunnah, that reading out aloud is the sunnah. But that's not what has been reported from the A'immah. And if we are following the Salaf, if we are going to follow the Salaf, then this is not something that the Salaf knew. The scholars, the A'immah of the past, this is not something that they did. So how can we following the way of the Salaf if we go against the opinions of the Salaf? If we bring about an opinion which basically all the Salaf didn't act upon or didn't even view as an opinion. But the reason Ibn Abbas did this was to show that it is correct and it is allowable and it's legislated for one to read, and it's the sunnah to read Surah Al-Fatiha, and not that reading out aloud is a sunnah. And that seems to be the understanding of the Salaf. That seems to be the understanding of the Salaf, and that's what has been practiced for more than 1,000 years. For more than 1,000 years, the Muslims have prayed Salatul Janaz upon any deceased person, and those who read Surah Al-Fatiha have read it silently, and the prayer has been a silent prayer. It has not been a loud prayer. And this is a practice of the Muslims. This is a practice of the Salaf. So where do we come and we taking one narration and understanding it according to our understanding, and then claim that we are following the way of the Salaf? How does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. So then after Surah Al-Fatiha, there's no other surah that we read. There's the second takbir, the second saying of Allahu Akbar. And after that, one reads the salah and salam upon the Prophet ﷺ, just like one reads in the prayer in the tashahhud. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. And this is called as-salat al-Ibrahimiyya. Salat al-Ibrahimiyya. Okay. And this is what has been reported. And then after that, there is the third takbir. And the third takbir, after that, there is the dua for the dua for the dead person to be recited. And there are various du'as that can be recited. And all of them are proven from the Prophet ﷺ. proven back to being taught by the Prophet ﷺ or from his companions. And Ibn Qudama rahimahullah mentions specific du'as. He mentions the du'as that he mentions in Umdah al-Fiqh. He says, Allahumma ghfir li hayyina wa mayyitina wa shahidina wa ghaibina wa saghirina wa kabirina wa dhakarina wa unthana innaka ta'lamu muqallabana wa mathwana wa anta ala kulli shay'in qadir. Allahumma man ahyaytahu minna fa ahyihi ala al-Islam والسنة ومن توفيته منا فتوفيه عليهما. That's one dua, and that's generally the dua that the Hanafis teach their children and teach in their madrasas. And it's also the dua that the Hanabila also endorse. So, oh Allah, forgive our living and our dead, and those present and those of us who are absent, the young amongst us, the old amongst us, the male amongst us, the female amongst us. Indeed, you know muqallabana, you know what we do, wa mathwana, and where we will end up, wa anta ala kulli shay'in qadir, and you are all powerful over all things. O Allah, the one who you give life from amongst us, then give him life upon Islam and Sunnah. And the one that you cause to die, then make him die upon them. That's one dua. Then he mentions the second dua. So he seems to say that you can combine more than one dua after the third takbir, you can combine more than one dua. So he says, Allahumma ghfir lahu warhamhu wa'afihi wa'fu anhu wa'akrim nuzlahu wa'usi' مدخله واغسله بالماء والثلج والبرد ونقه من الذنوب والخطايا كما ينقى الثوب الأبيض من الدنس وأبدله دارا خيرا من داره وجوارا خيرا من جواره وزوجا خيرا من زوجه وأدخله الجنة وأعذه من عذاب القبر وأعذه من عذاب النار وأفسح له في قبره ونور له فيه. This is another dua. This is in Hisn Muslim you will find these du'as, and there are other du'as as well. Then he says, ثم يكبر. Then he says Allah Akbar, the fourth Allahu Akbar, and then he ويسلم تسليمة واحدة عن يمينه, and he makes one salutation, one salam upon the right side. And he says, وَيَرْفَعُ يَدَيْهِ مَعَ كُلِّ تَكْبِيرًا. And the Hanbali position is that he raises his hands with every saying of Allahu Akbar. And then he mentions the wajib. He says, وَالْوَاجِبُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. The obligatory parts that must be performed for the prayer to be valid is at-takbirat. That all four takbirat are obligatory for the prayer to be valid. وَالْقِرَاءَةِ, that the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha, was-salatu ala nabi, reading the Salah al-Ibrahimiyya is an obligation, and the prayer is invalid without it. And the least amount which is considered as a dua for the dead person. So any dua, any amount even of dua, as long as it is called dua. So if somebody was to say, Allahumma ghfir lahu, oh Allah forgive him, or Allahumma arhamhu, oh Allah have mercy upon him, that's sufficient. That's sufficient as the dua. And then the last thing is the salam. That one taslima, one salam to the right side, or one salam, and that is the prayer. Okay, we're going to stop because Salat al-Maghrib has basically come in. It's coming now. So if there's any questions, please send them to me via email, as we don't have. We have some questions. Doesn't those that say you shouldn't read Surah Al-Fatiha? Doesn't that invalidate those that say, as long as the opinion you hold is based upon, as long as you're following an opinion which is an acceptable opinion, then in your madhab, that validates the prayer, then it doesn't matter what the next person believes. It's what you hold. So if you hold the reading the prayer without Surah Al-Fatiha is acceptable and doesn't invalidate the prayer, then your prayer, your Salat al-Janaiz, is valid. But if you hold that the opinion that reading Fatiha is a pillar of the prayer, and you don't read it, then your prayer is invalid because you hold that one who doesn't read it is prayer is invalid. So then your prayer is invalid. Yes, you put your hands together like in a normal prayer. So wherever you hold, we know there's many different opinions on where you hold your hands, and I'm not going to go into that. But as the Hanbali opinion is that you place your hands below the navel, or just on the navel, or just above the navel. The Hanbali opinion is not to place the hand on the chest. Rather, that's the Shafi'i opinion. And according to Imam Ahmed, that is disliked. According to Imam Ahmed, placing the hands on the chest is disliked, makruh, according to Imam Ahmed. Just for following, if we're going to follow the Hanbali opinion, then the Hanbali opinion is on the navel, just above the navel or below the navel. This is the madhab, which is the same as the Hanafi opinion. And Allah knows best. For the dua, of course, the hands don't move from their position, except to raise them to say Allahu Akbar. That's it. Okay, we're going to have to stop there because the prayer has come in and 10 minutes have passed. So, we've got one more? No? Okay. وإياكم. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wallahu a'lam.